June 24th, 1864. Almost July 1st when Jimmy Devers will have been a prisoner of war 1 year. Unless relief comes very soon, he'll die. I have read in my earlier years about prisoners in the Revolutionary War and other wars. It sounded noble and heroic to be a prisoner of war, and accounts of their adventures were quite romantic. But the romance has been knocked out of the prisoner of war business higher than a kite. It's a fraud. John Ransom, Andersonville.
The nightmare of an era, of a nation. Andersonville Prison. Originally called Camp Sumter, this peaceful field and cemetery pay tribute to the memory of those Civil War prisoners who lost part, or all of themselves, to Andersonville's horrors and deprivations. But these 475 acres represent more than a particular place or a particular time. As the national memorial for all American prisoners of war, Andersonville is an echo resounding the spirit of those who believe in their country, in their battles, and in the virtue of humanity.
Now you're talking about Civil War, cemetery, and prison camp. A feeling came over me that I had something in common here with these people.
I had run about 100 yards when I ran plumb into another line of them and was saluted with, "Throw down that gun, Yank. You're surrounded."
We crashed very quickly. It was a really bad wreck. We were going about 140, and they blew the tail boom off the helicopters.
A tree that I fell through ended up causing broken arm, broken shoulder, broken leg, dislocated knees.
They said there was 100 transports coming and the Pacific Fleet. They never did tell us the fleet was on the bottom of the bay in Pearl Harbor.
No backup, no grenades, no nothing. Nothing but we did have a pistol.
I had a grenade with him because we had ran across a couple of black prisoners that they had tried to take the skin off, and I wasn't going to be captured alive.
I had to kind of sit there and wait for them to walk through the fields to get me in the middle of the night.
When he broadcast the surrender, everybody was just motionless. And then when he broadcasted, everybody cried. And that was it.
There were 8 people on board, and 5 people were killed in the wreck, and the 3 of us that were left were captured.
Hungry, battle-worn, wounded and humiliated. Coupled with the stress of capture comes the journey to camp and the realization that things can get worse than ever expected.
The railroad was in bad shape. The old freight cars were squeaking for oil. The boxes of the axles caught on fire several times. The car I was in caught on fire and blazed up to the top of the car. The rebel guards who were posted on top commenced shouting to the engineers to stop. Prisoners yelled, "Let it burn."
Here they loaded us 90 to a boxcar, and so this is a pretty rigorous thing. They gave us a loaf of bread and threw away the key, so to speak, and 3-4 days later they unloaded whatever was left.
We had marched all day in the drizzling rain, and the few clothes left us were soaked. While in this condition, early in the night a strong wind came up from the north, accompanied with snow and then freezing. While all were suffering intensely from cold, many had to be rubbed and pounded to bring them back to consciousness, and many never awoke.
Anyone that couldn't go on their own power, the German guard shot and left there. In fact, during that march, I did not take my shoes off because the blood was coming through my shoes from the blisters that had broken. And I knew if I took my shoes off, I wouldn't get them back on and be able to walk.
They would put the rifle butts outside of their trucks and just knock you over like they were knocking over bowling pins. And then if you went over, the next truck would run you over.
Actually, I witnessed people being buried alive.
As the heavy wooden door closed behind us, my heart sank within me, and such a sense of utter and hopeless desolation crept over me as I hope never to feel again.
During the short operation of Andersonville, a period of only 14 months, 45,000 passed through its gates. Of that number, almost 13,000 died. Andersonville was hardly unique. Elmira Prison in New York had conditions every bit as horrendous as its southern counterpart. 25% of Elmira's 12,000 captives died. In fact, horrendous conditions have been more the rule than exception in American POW history.
When they put us in the barracks, we were able to build a fire till we run out of bunks. And when we run out of bunks, we didn't have no more fire.
7 men would lay across, and then 6 men on top of them, and 5 on top of them, and 4 on top of them. And then every 15 minutes we would shift positions so that we could all share in keeping our bodies warm.
Lots of guys did lose their toes and whatever, but everybody did get frostbitten.
I am very hungry. Every time I sleep, I dream of something good to eat. The crackers we get will not make 2 good mouthfuls. They're so thin and small.
You just couldn't sleep. You were too cold and hungry. And we would hang on the walls just waiting for the next meal, which wouldn't be very much.
Until now, I could not believe that misfortune and confinement, with a deprivation of the accustomed food, ease, and liberty of our dear country, could have wrought such a change in the human person. The young have not only acquired wrinkles, but appeared dried up and contracted in mind and body.
I was about 195 when I was shot down, and I think I got down as low as probably 120.
About 100 pounds, 105 pounds.
My first 2 years, I probably went down to 100 pounds.
And it was only if you happened to be there at a time when they happened to have food available that you got any.
They starved you half the time. They fed you lugar for breakfast. It was rice whipped up to like a starch. You could drink it, you know.
Went out in the rivers and just pull weeds and boil them and serve them to you as I don't know what.
I never waste anything. I don't.
Filth, overcrowding, and inadequate medical conditions were often as dangerous as cold and hunger. Any of these elements could kill.
There were continual noises during the night. The groans of the sick and the dying, the restlessness caused by the suffocating heat and the confined and poisoned air, mingled with the wild and incoherent ravings of delirium, were the sounds which every night raised around us in all directions.
We were engulfed in an ocean of black, grimy, emaciated beings, covered with sores, vermin, rags, and filth. Could it be possible, we thought, that these gaunt, filthy creatures with half-naked bony limbs, lusterless eyes, and feeble voices were ever able-bodied Union soldiers?
2,000 in this camp, and only about 14 others came out. Quite a few of them died due to the fact of no food and the medical care, because we had quite a few wounded with us.
We're in a hospital that doesn't have much medicine. It only has electricity about 3 hours a day. Didn't have the normal suture materials like you would normally use. Didn't have a lot of things. So we got as good as there was.
Another one of my brothers was attacked with the smallpox and was carried to the hospital. Within 5 hours after the operation, the skin became black and swollen as if poisoned. And in less than 2 days, the flesh was alive with maggots. On the second day, my brother died.
We simply had to put the body in a shallow 1-foot grave and put whatever rocks and dirt and snow and ice we could over them.
They put me on that detail to bury the dead. At one time we have about, that is daily, about an average between 300 to 500 in one hole.
Crazy man was shot dead by the guard an hour ago. The guard dropped a piece of bread on the inside of the stockade, and the fellow went inside the dead line to get it and was killed.
Of course, you got to have discipline. But as far as that, discipline and being mean is two different things.
Wake you up, especially at 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that, to ask you a question, just to keep you off guard, never let you get your guard up.
He said, I'm going to ask you again. And I gave him name, rank, and serial number. And at that point, he pulled the trigger. And I said, I'm not going to be wasted in this jungle like this. So I began to lie.
I gave him the name of every person in my squadron that I could think of, like John Doe, John Wayne, any name that I could think of.
Guy says fire, and they all go click, 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 click. And I laughed at them, and they shoved me in a trench for laughing.
They had to dig their own grave, and then they had them kneel in front of that grave, and then the firing squad took care of them from there.
He stuck this knife right between my fingers. He said, okay, Michael, I'm going to ask you 5 questions. For every question you don't answer, you're going to lose a finger.
They wore these boots with the hobnails on the bottom of their things, and they just raked them down your shins.
Sometimes they were bucked and gagged and their arms tied down over their knees and left to lay in the burning sun.
I put both my legs in stocks and clamped them down and left me there for 75 days.
I spent a month in a blindfold, naked, hunching around on a bare concrete floor with cuffed behind every night.
Although POWs endured extreme physical and mental abuse, possibly the worst torture of all was having to witness the brutalization of fellow prisoners and not being able to stop it.
In the most severe case that I know, they brought back this one friend of mine and essentially brutalized him to death.
You can just hear him just beating him senseless and not being able to do anything to help him.
Well, we were all very upset. We could hear it. We were nearby.
Surviving captivity and torture often hinges on more than mere physical endurance. Throughout history, many found self-respect, determination, and hope just as nourishing as bread, water, or medicine.
I had resolved, however, that it was better to be killed outright than to starve to death, and determined to make my escape or die in the attempt.
You think that you don't fight as a POW. You're hand-to-hand combat every day, but your hands are tied behind your back.
Resistance made us feel good because even though we didn't do a lot, it helped the morale to have resistance.
And of course the other thing was that you dreamed about having a glorious meal someday.
That was the main thing, is eats.
But I spent 6, 8, 10 hours a day thinking about what meal I was going to cook myself when I got home. I had this obsession with eating chocolate.
I think one of the favorite dreams of food was having a large waffle covered with ice cream.
You sing every song you know, you go through every musical you remember.
You remember things you had totally forgotten. You could remember, because it's all in your head. Everything you've ever experienced is in there. You could probably remember every name from your first grade social studies class if you were locked in a cell for a week.
I learned French on the wall, tapping on the wall.
Anytime we made any noise, it was a tap code, because you didn't have to do it with your hand or on a wall. You could do it with a broom, you could do it with a stick, you could do it with virtually any other way.
And if they said, you go out and sweep the walks, that was a chance to give a speech. I just said hi.
I had, in my mind, put the words into, had about 5,000 words cataloged in French and English. And, somebody'd ask me a word, and I'd have to go through my head and find it.
We used that to catalog the names of every single person that we had actually seen alive. That was one of the rules. And as a result of this, we all cataloged. I had 367 names.
And I told Shoemaker, I said, you got to give me more words because I won't even learn French before we get out of here. Oh, hell, we were there. How many? 5 more years? Hell, me.
The very worst thing is worrying about what your family thinks happened to you.
I think everyone's thoughts always went back to their wife.
The blue car had to come to my house. And I began to imagine not only at my house, but somebody had to go tell my mother.
I had 2 kids then, and I was just determined to live.
There were very few married men that got out alive that had been in this prison any length of time, for their wives and little ones were always on their mind.
The ones that I think suffered the most, especially mentally, were those that gave up.
And you go through what I call the I feel sorry for me syndrome. You can die from it. It'll kill you. Because if you allow it to go so far, you essentially give up.
On the 12th, I went into number 5 prison for to see John Taylor Jr., the son of Captain John Taylor of New York, who had hung himself during the night. May the Lord be with him, and the devil miss him.
I was brought up in church, and I just prayed a lot. And for some reason, I don't know, I guess I just figured that I was going to make it.
I think the firing squad deal put my faith in the Lord to the point where I knew that he was out there taking care of me, and I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I never had fear after that.
But the thing that I like to emphasize to myself is how the comradeship with the other prisoners, whether we were face-to-face or tapping through a wall, really saved my life, and how I gained strength from this mutual trust and affection.
The very important things, like you're on the same side, and you're the only 2 friends you have in the world right then. I mean, the rest of the world just disappears, and there's just you and whoever you're with, and it was a very comforting thing.
And he says, all you have to do, Bill, he says, is look at the American flag. And I did. And that's all I saw. I didn't see another thing except the American flag. It was flying there. And I used to dream about things like that. Jesus.
If 'tweren't for hope, the heart would break. And I am hopeful yet.
And then, after loss and deprivation, frustration and misery, freedom.
All I wanted was get the hell out of here.
The guys had gone over the fence, and the Japs, instead of shooting them, they just pick them up, grab them, and throw them back inside. So we knew that the war was over.
One day we were laying in our room, and all of a sudden an American showed up at the door. And he had a .45 pistol on his belt, and he was liberation.
On they came, ghastly tired, with skeleton bones and lusterless eyes, and brains bereft of but one thought, and hearts purged of but one feeling, the thought of freedom, the love of home.
Until we punched through the clouds, and we were well above their AAA envelope, did I actually believe that we were home free. And as we crossed the Kuwaiti border there with Iraq, we had 2 American F-15 Eagles roll up on either side of the airplane. They did victory rolls, lit their afterburners, and went straight up. And everybody was pumped then. We knew that we were safe.
And as we began to come up, we could see on the horizon the tail of a C-141. Actually, it's still a pretty emotional time, thinking back on it. But I can't even tell the story.
I guess I did what 99% of the people did. They got out and got down on the ground and they kissed the tarmac out there.
When I arrived there, I called my home, which is about 25 miles away. And within a half hour, some of my people were there to pick me up.
When we first saw each other was in Bethesda, and she was more beautiful than I had imagined, or that I had remembered. It was very special.
Told him that's what I wanted, and we ate Mexican food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for about 5 days straight.
My particular desire was to read. So when I got to Clark Air Force Base, which was our first place, I had all these books, and I would read and then fall asleep. My eyes would hurt, and I'd wake up and read some more, and I'd fall asleep, wake up.
I spent my 40s in jail. I was just short of 42, and I was just about 50 when I got out.
One child who was 7 years old when I came home I had never seen. It was very hard, very difficult to come home. I was a Rip Van Winkle.
Time has done much and will yet do more to heal up the wounds created by the war. This is as it should be. But after centuries have passed away, the name of Andersonville will be a reproach and a byword to the civilization of the 19th century.
Even today, it's hard for me to conceive the thought that one human being could do this kind of thing to another human being, no matter how much you hate that human being.
It's part of my identity that, that I have lived like an animal.
I have learned a lesson I shall never forget in this life. If I live forever, I will never find fault with anything again.
And I didn't do anything more or anything less, I hope, than any average American citizen would do who loves his or her country.
No, I am not sorry I was a prisoner of war, because I did the best I could at the time for my country and for my family, and I'm very proud of what I did.
I mean, I'm not ashamed that I was a POW. I'm just glad that I came out of it.
We had prisoners of war from every war that's ever gone or thought about for centuries. And it's the same thing. Just happens to be that we're the ones that are today.
We can talk about the misery, but let's not forget the other side, the goodness we were able to pass along to each other.
These men, exposed to the rays of a southern sun by day, to rain and storm by night, suffering thirsty and gnawing hunger, consumed by lice and fleas and mosquitoes and maggots, suffering from scurvy until the teeth dropped from the gums, dying at the rate of more than 100 a day, remained faithful to their flag.
If need be, I would die for the flag and for what it stands for. But that's freedom. If you ever lose it and regain it, you know what you've lost.
This film, as I said before, is very hard to follow because it almost minimizes what we're trying to do and represent here at this table. As you can see, there's 6 chairs there. 6 chairs represents the various branches of our service. We start off with the Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard. Also, the 6th chair, does anybody know why it should be a 6th chair at this table? Because the fact is that civilians have been prisoners also, and the 6th chair represents the civilians that have been prisoners of war. All we have to think about in the Philippines, up in St. Thomas, General Thomas, which is just north of Manila, because there were all the civilian prisoners were shipped up there, the females, the women, also all the nurses from Corregidor and Bataan. This is a very interesting time of the year because just about this time in 1942, Bataan fell. After Manila fell, Bataan fell. And in May, Corregidor fell. So the Japanese had all these prisoners to take care of, and they were not geared to take care of prisoners. In the Japanese culture, it was a dishonor for them to surrender. And it was not only just a dishonor for the soldier, it was also a dishonor for the family. That's why at the beginning of the war, very, very numerous battles were fought, and the Japanese were not surrendering. It was a dishonor. We've got the little page here. And it's dated Tuesday, April 19, year 2018. It's a picture of a gentleman who was lost in Okinawa 73 years ago. He was on a border area in the Marines. He threw a grenade into a cave, and the cave blew up and disintegrated not only the cave, but the soldier. He was initially buried in an unknown grave in Okinawa. He then went down and was buried in Manila. And subsequent to that, the family wanted to know what happened to him. Luckily, the DNA concept today, which is not prevalent years ago, is now prevalent. They found a descendant of a relative of this Marine, and they were by remains that were exhumed, found out that yes, he was this Marine. It took 73 years to come home. I'll pass this around because when I speak, I like to bring a picture because it shows you not only a name, but an individual. And here he is at the table. It's a round table. It's round because they're never giving up to locate prisoners of war and MIs. as John said, is that approximately 4,000 are still missing from World War I. Over 80,000 are still missing from World War II. Over 8,000 are still missing from Korea. And almost nearly just shy of 2,000 are still missing from the Vietnam War. As some of those pictures showed, is that the Persian Gulf had their prisoners of war. Iraq and Syria had one. A private, they almost dishonored that POW flag. He walked away from his counterparts. He was encompassed 5 years as a prisoner. To get his release from the captors, our government gave up 5 prisoners from Guantanamo. The soldier's name was Bergdahl. He came home, a staff sergeant. He had the freedom of the base he was at. He subsequently was, in fact, he was court-martialed. He subsequently was found guilty. He was reduced in rank to a private. He was dishonorably discharged, and he went to prison. His name was Bergdahl. But for 5 years, we carried him as a prisoner of war. The table is white because it symbolises the purity of one who goes into service to defend our country. This chair, there's 6 chairs here. Normally, for a missing man, you do it with 1. That's only, I have one place sitting here. On this plate, there's a piece of lemon, the bitterness of becoming a prisoner. The salt, it remains after the tears of the soldier who cries and a family member. The single rose for the missing. The red ribbon for the blood that's been shed. The Bible perpetuates the faith that we have in the military and brings us home. And I'm sure you thought about this when you went down from 35,000 feet to 8. This book was issued to me when I went in the Navy in 1951 at Bainbridge, Maryland. In doing so is that one of the songs that we learned at that time was the Navy hymn, which the Eternal Father, strong to save, whose arm was calm the restless wave, who bids the mighty ocean deep, his own appointed limits keep. Oh, hear us as we cry to thee, for those in peril on the sea. How many Navy people we have here? Thank you. So how many people know the origin, how we came up with the missing table? Does anybody know the story? Anybody interested in knowing the story? It came about during, again, the Vietnam War. The River Rats was an Air Force unit in Vietnam. And in 1970s, they perpetuated doing a reunion of their people, remembering the prisoners that were losing and missing in action. And that was in 1973. It became more developed because the concept of the missing man table was never initiated by the government. It came up from the people, the troops. And in doing so, they developed this table. The other part of it is a Master Sergeant Rosen, who said he did it in 1980. There was no evidence of any type of material that was available to indicate that he did in fact create the missing man table. It was the Air Force that did it, and they're credited with the missing man table. the candle that's lit is you show their way home. It burns brightly. And you know, is that about 2 years ago, Walmart came out with the fact of having a lit candle for those who are missing and servicing the needs of our neighbors. It's the green light. And if anybody goes by a house, mine included, we have a candle that perpetuates that return. Out there, as you come in the entranceway, how many people have seen that American flag? How many people have counted the stars in that flag? How many stars do you think is in that flag?
48.
Who said?
48.
48, correct. When I saw that, I counted the flags, the stars the other day, and I said to myself, that's a ceremonial flag, a casket flag. And on there, sure enough, there's a plaque there indicating it was, in fact, covering a casket. This is a casket flag. In doing so, I've never, in the Navy we call it breaking the flag. I've never opened this flag up to know how many stars on it. Because years ago, during a military ceremony, after firing on taps, you would get 3 shells, and each one would go into a corner. Subsequent to that, is that the military felt it was a disgrace and a dishonor to have to pick up a shell from the ground and put it in the flag. So what they do now, the honor guard will take up those shells with a plastic bag and hand it to the survivor as a testimonial of the volley. The glass, the wine glass, it depicts that the soldier will never be able to enjoy the fruit of our land and our toast. It's upside down. The proximity of this table to the door is not by just happen to be done, is that there is where that table is supposed to be as you enter in a dining facility that you'll find in every military installation, every naval installation, ships at sea. It is all memories of the individuals that we think about at this time. We think about the concept of, and it's brought out in that film there, is about the family support. Because there's 2 people there that are very prominent, Admiral Stockdale and Lieutenant Superior McCain. Both these guys were almost 4 to 5 years, and particularly with McCain, his father was an admiral, and the Vietnamese were bargaining to ship him home in front of us early on, and he refused to be separated and take that option. So that's the kind of guy that he was. I want to do the seriousness of it before I give you that little bit of humor I have, is that everybody remembers the B-17s flying out of England. One of the bases there, Air Force bases, was at Burtonwood. When I was over there in Burtonwood, in the center of town, they have this little area there that's encompassed by a wire fence with figurines of women on top. And what they said to us, not the Beverly now, is that these Vestal virgins were the only virgin in Burtonwood. I thought it was funny, but I remember that. So that's what we've done. What we've done here, though, is bring out the fact of our allies. In World War I, as you know, we're in the 100th anniversary of World War I. The 102nd was mobilized on April 6th of 1917, trained in New Haven at Yale area on the New Haven Green, went to France. When it landed in France as a part of the 26th Infantry Division, he said, Lafayette, we are here. How many people remember Lafayette? General Lafayette was very prominent up here in the north. In November, I was down at Fort Bragg, Fayetteville, North Carolina. And Fayetteville is named after General Lafayette. And he was very prominent down there in the Carolinas. The whole city is named after him. So it's spreading out. The reason I'm saying about the World War is that the British lost on one day, the first day of the Somme, 28,000 of the British soldiers were killed on it one day. 28,000. The casualties of these two wars are there. And in World War I, almost 100,000 were lost between battle deaths and diseases, which were basically a lot with influenza. In World War II, almost 500,000 were lost, and almost equal between about 250,000 between the European Pacific, about 250,000 each one. Korea was about 58,000 were between battle casualties and wounded and died. And in Vietnam was about 58,000. And I guess the Persian Gulf in 1991 was about 340 were killed. So when you look at this table, you have to think about what it represents. You know, a lot of this was brought out that because Andersonville was horrendous. And up in New York was Andersonville was in New York. But when you think about the sunken road down there, how many people have been down in the South and visit some of the battlefields like Wilderness? Appomattox was at the end of Fort Lee, or was down at Petersburg, the mine that blew up, the miners. So when John asked me about participating tonight, I really couldn't say no, because I feel personally it's an honor to be able to bring my story to these people and bring out that, even for the origin, because I often question myself is that how do we get this table? It was only because I did some search on my own to find out that it didn't have an organized beginning. It came out of the troops to recognize their fallen comrades. So when you look at that black flag out there, it's symbolic. The one black silhouette, the one in the watchtower, and the single strand of barbed wire. And barbed wire has a personal thought to me to share, is that recently at a ambassador from Korea was at one of our meetings, and he presented us with a medal. And it was fabricated, because over there every year or so they have to replace the barbed wire on the DMZ. And what the Korean government did was they put pieces of little wire into that metal and presented it to us as a symbolic. And the American service people are still very, very well thought about in Korea. And all you have to do is look at the difference in the picture of South Korea at night and North Korea at night. How many say that? The difference, and that's what they remember over there, is that they say the only way they have available to be able to do something like that is because we did this stuff in 1950 to 1953. And by coincidence is that this is the 65th year of the battle cessation on July 27th of 1953 in Korea. It also represents the date is that 75 years ago, the USS Helena, CL-50, was sunk on the Battle of Kula Gulf. And the reason I bring up that ship is I served on its following subsequent on the USS Helena CA-75, which was a heavy cruiser in Korea. And I'm proud to say we have another gentleman over here, Miss Korea. And that young lady's dad was Korean. And how many other Koreans people we have here out there? Thank you, sir. Nice to meet you. So anybody have any questions that you want to talk about? You've got me up. And then one thing they tell is that never give an officer an opportunity to talk because they don't stop. You know, there's so much tradition that came out of that, and there's so much tradition you guys represent here. You know, I look at the faces and oh, by the way, all you white-haired guys, this is Arctic blonde. My brother prefers his hair as Arctic blonde, not white. And we have a few people that don't even have hair, but that doesn't minimize their hair. But you guys have done a lot of service, and I think if we ever counted up the years of service here in this room, we have to talk about hundreds of years. And I'm very proud to say that one of my neighbors was Roger Mazza, and he was with the 8th Air Force in England. And we go back. And how many people remember Roger Mazza on Wolfville Road? But he was a member of this group for quite a few years. He subsequently passed away, but he was a great guy. So now I'll ask any questions, please.
I have one. In the documentary that we saw, there wasn't any reference to the prison ships in New York Harbor during the Revolutionary War.
Right.
And I wondered if there's a story about that somewhere that we could hear something about.
We could check into it. Yeah. But it was bring up about prison ships. Before that fact, I was the Japanese that was transferring a lot of people from the Philippines up to Japan for labor camps, and they were torpedoed by our people because they didn't know that they were on our ships. And with the Japanese, again, is that at the end of the war in 1945, the units were actually told to kill their prisoners. And in some areas, they were actually done, they did it. The trenches were dug out, the prisoners put in the trenches, gasoline was put on them, and they were burned to death. And there were hundreds there. And how many people remember the book of the Ghost Soldiers? When the group went up in Camp O'Donnell in the Philippines, they were able to save between the American people and the Filipino allies, they saved over, I guess, about 500 that were captured there. And they were worried because they got the word that the Japanese were going to kill the prisoners. So the Philippines are very, very mindful of what we did for them also. And they did a great job. And as you know, is that in several years ago, is that World War II merchant marines were considered to be not prisoners, but the veterans. And we lost a lot of merchant mariners, particularly in 42 and 43 to 44, and by submarines. So we've got an awful lot to be thankful for. And also, by the way, is that eagle is always supposed to be outboard, facing outboard, never cocked up to another side. That's why I put it straight out. We'll be the hell with it. I think your organization is great. It has a proud lineage coming out of the First World War, and then also developing into what it is today. And if you look at the weaponry that we have now between the planes and what we have our first soldiers, it's like years ago you thought about the moon it's just up there, and then we have people on it. Faster than sound. But look at the flights that we have today, the knowledge, and the young troopers. I've been at Paris Island with the Marine recruits. I've seen Great Lakes with the Navy recruits. I've been to San Diego with the Marine recruits. I've seen people down at Lackland, at Randolph down in Texas. Those young people are outstanding people. They're there because they want to be. And we all can be very, very proud of them. And they're there, they have a mission coming back. And hopefully they'll all come back safe and sound. So I'd like to say God bless the United States of America, and God bless our military. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.